Welcome, everybody, to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, igniting leadership excellence. I'm Rick, and this is my co host, Emily.
Hi.
This is episode number 30, and today we are talking about wrestling the Gator of fire service retirement.
Mm.
Emily and I have been doing this now for over a year, and
Yeah.
this is where we talk about everything that is related to leadership, and we do approach it from a biblical worldview. So, what are we talking about here today? Emily, let's dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so today's episode is Wrestling the Gator of Fire Service Retirement. Whew, bit of a mouthful. So I think we should just dive right in. So explain what you mean by the gator analogy and why retirement from the fire service is like wrestling an unpredictable beast.
Yeah, absolutely. I retired from the fire service in May of 2020. I spent 37 years on the job, starting out as a volunteer firefighter in a small town in southern New Jersey, and then being a firefighter in the Air Force and the Marine Corps prior to coming here to Loveland, Colorado, where I served out 30 years, retiring as a battalion chief. Been around the fire service in one form or another since I was 3 years old when I had my first ride in a fire engine. Have collected things related to the fire service, have
Yeah.
photographed thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures of fire trucks and traded them. And now my business is the Fire Officer Leadership Academy, where I work with firefighters and mentoring and coaching and teaching. One of my premier courses is the art of decision making and situational awareness at the command level.
It's
So
in
it's
your
been,
blood.
yeah, it's in my blood.
Yeah.
And so that's why I chose wrestling the gator of fire service retirement. Because for many of us in the fire service, it's not just a job that you go down to and then you come home at the end of the night.
Yeah.
You know, for volunteer firefighters, it's in their blood, it's in their community. For me, who had served as a volunteer and then as a career firefighter, it was a privilege to be a firefighter and get paid to do the job that I loved and the bonds that I formed. And so then stepping away from it is like wrestling an alligator. And I first started delving into change management my last year at the Executive Fire Officer Program, which is at the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland. We had to write an applied research project that was related to that particular year's class and also an issue that we were facing either in our community or in our fire department. And so I addressed change management relative to moving from a 24-hour operational shift into a so-called, and I'll explain why I say so-called 8-hour staff position. In my case, it was going to be the training chief. And the
Mhm.
so-called comes into fact as there's no such thing as an 8-hour day. It was just constantly busy.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of research on change management and transition, and a lot of the information that I gleaned out of that, and then my experiences moving into the training chief's position in May of 2013, and then I was able to go back on shift again after about a 15-month stint. And so now applying that research and my experiences going from shift work into staff work and then back to shift work and then retiring is why I said wrestling the gator of fire service retirement.
Yeah. So there are definitely unexpected challenges that lead to retirement. So let's talk about some of that. What are some of the common misconceptions about fire service retirement?
Well, for me, I knew it was going to be tough.
Yeah.
And I've seen others who thought, well, I'm done. I've seen it. I had one man on my shift. He came to me one day, actually, while we were out doing a training, and wanted to speak to me inside the command vehicle. And he said, I'm going to retire, Rick. I'm done. I can't do this anymore.
Hmm.
And he has seen a lot of nasty stuff over the years of his career, and he was a good firefighter, and he was a good company officer. But I think one of the misconceptions, Emily, is that You say you're going to retire on a particular date.
Hmm.
You're done. You turn in your protective gear. You turn in, your uniforms, clean out your locker. You go and you think that's going to be the end of it. Well, it's not. It's not the end of it. And, maybe at another podcast later down the road, we can, talk more about, the things that we carry into retirement. And what I mean, folks, by that, and for the firefighters who are listening, you know what I'm talking about. You carry the calls, you carry the memories, you carry the images and the smells and the sounds. They don't just go away because in my case, retiring at 0730 on May 3rd, 2020, it didn't
Hmm.
just stop. That stuff gets carried. So I think it's a misconception, with many firefighters is it's done. I'm walking away from this. You're not walking away from it, guys, ladies who are involved in this. You
No.
are carrying that mental trauma with you into retirement. And I think that's one of the biggest ones. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are out there who are working with firefighters who, currently as volunteers and on the job as paid, but once they are leaving the career, that's a misconception. I think another misconception that I've seen sometimes too is like, well, okay, I've spent 20, 25, 30, 40 years on the job and now it's my time. Now, hey, folks, that's a misconception. There's still life that goes on after that.
Hmm.
Don't check out. For those of you who are approaching retirement in the
Yeah.
fire service, don't check out from life. And don't isolate yourself from people. So those are just a couple of the misconceptions, Emily, that I have seen in other firefighters. And some folks, they just walk away and they never look back. And when I mean they never look back, they never come back to the firehouse. They want nothing to do with the fire service. And that's a shame because I know they are still carrying things from the job. And periodically, I get together with guys who have retired from the fire service, and there are things that they definitely miss about it, which we'll hit that a little bit later here in
Yeah.
this podcast.
I think I was just telling someone the other day about you. It's like you can take the guy out of the firehouse, but you can't take the firehouse out of the guy. It's always in your blood
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, definitely for me. It's in my blood. Riding a fire engine at 3 years old, and here I am. We're still doing a podcast called Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick and the Business's Fire Officer
Yeah.
Leadership Academy. Yeah, I intend on doing this as long as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And when I say this, I mean working with firefighters and working with fire departments. And God has blessed me. He's given me opportunities over the years, and I want to be able to take this and share and mentor and help firefighters who are out there, and I can help them along and prepare for things that they may not yet have encountered.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have any stories from retired firefighters about surprises they faced that you would like to share?
I have one in particular of a division chief here in Loveland that he had set a retirement date and then bumped it back. And then he retired. And next thing I know, I think it was just a few months later, certainly it was less than a year, that I saw he was doing some consulting with some of the smaller fire departments in the area, and I kind of chuckled. Then the next thing I know is he was a chief officer in one of those departments right there. And it showed me that, yeah, he had, and he still does. I run into him maybe once a year, twice a year if I'm fortunate, because I really like this individual. And I'm not going to say his name because I don't know if he'd want me, announcing his name to the world
Yeah.
on a podcast. But that I think it was more of a surprise for him
Hmm.
than it was for me and for the other folks on the job. It's like, yeah, we knew that he couldn't just, retire and walk away from that. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of the biggest surprises that I've seen related to somebody else retiring from the fire service.
Hmm. Interesting. What do you think are the emotional and psychological impact of leaving the firehouse brotherhood?
It's that last word, the
Brotherhood.
brotherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the brotherhood, the sisterhood. We had a fire chief that called it the Bristerhood. Yeah. Yeah. Now the camaraderie that exists in the fire service cannot be beat. I absolutely
Yeah.
loved it. I loved being in the firehouse, and as a battalion chief, I loved getting in the command vehicle and going out and visiting the fire stations and spending time with the troops, sharing what had happened in my career, sharing leadership stories. And that's one of the things that was a catalyst for making me write. Well, I shouldn't say making me, for having me write my book, The Furnace of Leadership Development, because I had
Mhm.
people on the ship saying, Chief, you ought to write this stuff down. And certainly you and Rebecca,
Yeah.
and Deb, encouraging me. And, and you get to the point that when you retire, you miss it. You miss that brotherhood. I'm fortunate though, we live right up the street from one of the firehouses. So
Mhm.
I go down there, politically. No, yeah,
Periodically.
periodically, not politically, periodically. And I participate in a Bible study that one of our local firefighters has. And
Yeah.
so I love that. But it's a change and it's a transition that takes place. And in that research that I did, a guy named William Bridges wrote a book called Managing Transitions, and he identified a distinct difference between change and transition. And Bridges said that change is the situation.
Mm.
So approaching retirement, that's the situation. That's the change. For me, May 3rd, 2020, bang, that's it. The transition now takes place mentally where you're transitioning out of that life. And I'm sure you've seen me, go through some difficulties,
Yeah.
transitioning out of the fire service and that lifelong career. And, maybe in another podcast too, Emily, we can delve more into change and transition and, the impacts that it has on people. Because it's not just
Yeah.
firefighters. And I think this is a good point also to
Yep.
add in people that our podcast is, yeah, Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, igniting leadership excellence, and my business is fire related. Well, our podcast can reach a broad audience of people. So if you tuned in and you said, well, I'm not a firefighter, I don't need to listen to this. Well, you're probably going to pick up something, from us along the way that's leadership related.
Yeah,
So
and while we're touching mainly on like fire service retirement, really this could apply to someone in the military, someone in the police department, or
yes.
even just me when I left working at the city in HR. Like we were a family there and I left that family and it's never been the same again.
Yeah,
So it really
absolutely.
can apply to all different careers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And mentioning that, I was uh, thinking of a story that Paul Callan related to me a few years back. And Paul was a colonel in the Marine Corps, and he was telling me about a sergeant major that was in his unit and had retired. I believe it was after 30 years in the Marine Corps.
Hmm.
And the sergeant major would show up in their battalion area and just kind of wander around, and the younger Marines, would not engage him. So, Paul and his current sergeant major talked about that and said, this man's got a lot of experience and a knowledge that needs to be shared. So they built a little area with a bench and a covering from the sun, so when the sergeant major showed up, he could sit down, and then they encouraged the junior Marines, talk to this man. And they did. And they noticed that when the sergeant major would show up, that the younger Marines were engaging him. They were talking to him. And that certainly is beneficial to, both sides
Yeah.
of that, because you're right. It's not just the fire service, it's law enforcement. And I've talked to there's a police officer that has retired from Loveland PD here. I've talked to a couple of those guys, and yeah, it's a lot. It is. It's a big loss when you spend
Yeah.
all those years, especially in a high intensity career,
Hmm.
law enforcement, military, EMS,
Hmm.
firefighting. Where you develop those very strong bonds
Yeah.
and
And get
ties.
each other.
Yeah. Yes.
Just
Yeah. Absolutely.
random Joe Schmuck won't understand the fire service. So you guys really do get each other and get what calls you go through and you build that community and that relationship
Yes,
with each other.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So we touched on the unexpected challenges. So let's go down into emotional and mental
Hmm.
preparation. So, how do you handle the loss of identity after retirement?
Yeah, that was something that I was first faced with before my first year at the executive fire officer program. And in the reading that we did, I read a story about a individual that after he had graduated from college, he got a job in a Fortune 500 company working in the mailroom, worked his way all the way to the top as the CEO of this company. And after 30 years, he retired. On a Friday afternoon, they had a retirement party for him. Monday morning, he came back to clean out his office, and there were people that were ignoring him.
Hmm.
On Friday afternoon, people were calling him
Wow.
Mr. Such and Such. On Monday morning, the people that were talking to him, they were calling him by his first name.
Hmm.
And so this guy went into a depression because his entire identity was wrapped up into this position that he was
Hmm.
in. I
Yeah.
got done, I got done. And that book, by the way, folks, is called Leadership on the Line that I was reading by two gentlemen, Heifetz and Linsky. It's really a good book. I recommend it. After reading that segment in the book, I went upstairs to look on the shelf to see how many fire department t-shirts I had. It's like, and I counted. It's like, this is crazy. I'm that guy. I had 51 fire department t-shirts, and they were not from Loveland Fire Rescue. They were from other fire departments, not only
Hmm.
from around the United States, but some from Germany and France and
Yeah.
places like that. And I said, I cannot be that guy. I cannot have my identity wrapped up as being a firefighter or a battalion chief. I cannot have my identity wrapped up in my badge, my patch, my uniform, my protective gear. It can't be. Well, number one, my identity as a believer in Christ has to be in Christ. So that's where some of that mental preparation. But I could tell
Yeah.
you that even though I was starting to prepare then, and that was 2009, and what was it, 11 years later is when I walked out of the firehouse, there were still things that I was not prepared for. I was aware of, but not prepared for
Yeah.
because I hadn't lived it yet.
Yeah. There's just some things you can't be prepared for until you're in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
this is one of them.
Yeah. So, what about family and relationship adjustments? Like what should we tell them to expect and how to prepare
Hey,
for that?
for those of you who you're working full time. Certainly, again, we'll come back to military, police, but the fire, we went from working a 24-hour shift to a 48-hour shift.
Yeah, that was an adjustment.
Yeah, that was an adjustment. I think that was more an adjustment for you and
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca and Deb, your
Mm-hmm.
mom, my
Even the
my
dog.
wife. Yeah, even the dog. Yeah, even the dog because she was used to seeing me come home,
Mm-hmm.
the next morning and greeting me at the door. So
Yeah.
now it's 48 hours later. And so that adjustment of because we had talked about this, hey, what's it going to be like when I'm home? And I run the business out of the basement, which I lovingly call my command post. Now, what's this going to be like?
Yeah.
Even when I went into training
It was an
back in,
adjustment.
yeah, because I remember, uh, Deb and, you
Hmm.
girls saying, oh, what's going to happen to our girls' nights? We're not going to be able to watch the food shows. We're not going to be able to watch Hallmark and stuff like that. Well, if you recall, none of that changed.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, none of that changed except that I was around. So there is an adjustment because and listen, uh, men, women who are in any of these professions, if you got a rough marriage, it's going to get rougher when you're home more.
Hmm.
Now, my wife and I have been blessed. We've been married now 37 and a half years. And yeah, there's been rough places along our marriage, but we have, by the grace of God, we have worked them out. So develop that ability to communicate with each other so that
Yeah.
transition is easier. I'm not saying it's all, pie in the sky and anything like that. And you know, if you're not communicating already with, your wife about what it's like being on the job, or if you're a female firefighter communicating, with your husband about what it's like being on the job, they may, if they don't understand right now, they need to understand right now what the camaraderie is like.
Yeah.
So that when you do walk away from the job, and the same thing with the military. Yeah, hey, I served 9 years in the service. And people who've never been in the military, they may think they know what it's like because they watch some of these things that are on TV. They watch movies and documentaries and things like that. But that's
They
another
don't
world.
know.
Yeah, if you've never been there, you don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
Even if your Uncle Joe, served in the military, and you've listened to Uncle Joe's stories, and you've never been there, then you don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
Hell, and it's a rough, rough transition. When I transitioned from the Marine Corps to civilian life, holy moly, Emily,
Yeah.
coming from a very disciplined organization where people knew what they were doing, people had a sense of purpose, coming out here, where you got people just bouncing around in life like a pinball in the pinball machine. It's like I struggled. I definitely struggled
Yeah.
with that. So there is a big family adjustment that will take place.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, with that being said, from my end, because you're my daughter, what share with our audience maybe some of the concerns that you had with me
Yeah.
retiring.
I don't know if it was necessarily concerns, but it was a grief for me.
Hmm.
Um, I grew up as a firefighter's daughter. It was my identity being a fireman's daughter. And so when you were going to retire, I'm like, well, who am I? I've always been this fireman's daughter and so proud of it. And I still am very proud of it. You've always been like my hero, but literally you are a hero being a firefighter too. And so I was very proud of your occupation and very proud to say that I was a firefighter's daughter. I grew up in the firehouse. Although it was hard, a lot of our holidays were in the firehouse.
Yeah.
And so I just have a very special place in my heart for the fire service and for the fire department. And it really was a family. And when you got really sick back in 2013, that was made so clear of how much of a family it was when you were in the hospital for that week. We had a revolving door of blue
Mm.
uniforms
Yeah, that
coming
was
in
such a
and out, and
blessing.
even people off shift. And then we had people that came to visit me at work to just drop me off a coffee
Yeah.
and to check in on me. And so, I mean, you just can't emphasize enough how much of a family it is.
Mm.
And then just on just a fun, I don't know, just a nosy side of things is you were always in the know. Like you knew what the calls were, where the fire was, and different things like that. And now we're kind of completely out of the loop. And that's kind of a bit of a bummer sometimes when I really want to know like what's
Mm.
going on when you've like lived like that, or you're in the loop
Mm.
like that, and then suddenly you're not. It is a strange,
Mhm.
it is very strange. Granted, it's been nice not having to figure out holidays again, or, learning, you being constantly on
Mhm.
call and having to just leave by a drop of a dime. Like
Yeah.
there's a fire or there's some sort of call that you
Mm.
have to be on or man the station for. So I think that's like been nice as well. But, we just learned how to adapt and be flexible with the change. And I have definitely taken that into my
Mhm.
life, learning to be flexible and adaptable like that. But yeah, and I think one thing that was sad that I had worked through is I don't think I ever imagined you retiring from the fire department, which I know isn't realistic, but in my, little like planner brain, I just always envisioned that you would be there probably till like the day you died, basically. And I would bring my kids there to visit you, and you would show them the fire trucks and walk them around the station and have them slide down the pole. And I know that could still happen and I'm glad that you've like kept up your relationships just for that sake,
Mhm.
because like that's something that I was really, if it came down in the future, like looking forward to is pop showing the kids around like the firehouse. So I had to just work through like my future plans that you derailed by retiring.
I derailed your plans. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Hmm.
That's a great perspective, Emily, and thanks for sharing that with the people who are listening to the podcast right here. Because what Emily is saying about the family aspect, yeah, now, yes, we were a unique family, and I mean us, the Davises, were a unique family. There's other families out there that, frankly, the wife or the husband might say, "Yeah, I'm glad you're done. I'm glad you're retiring." They've never wanted anything to do with it,
Yeah.
it's
Sad.
sad. But in our case, no, that wasn't the case. And our families are part of the fire service, part of the law enforcement, part of the military. Our
Yeah.
My oldest daughter, Rebecca, her husband's career Air Force. She's a military wife. She's part of it. She's part of the long hours. She's part of the last minute changes. And these things impact a lot more than just the individual that is there. Emily talked about holidays. Yeah, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Christmas Eve,
Yeah.
New Year's Eve,
Easter.
Easter, Fourth of July,
Yeah.
all them, spent
Yeah.
many times at the firehouse. Then other families would come down as well, and not
Hmm.
just the station that I was working out of, but other stations. And so most of those times we never finished the meal. Something would happen. And
Yep.
you're getting called out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a big family. So thank you for sharing that, Emily.
Yeah. So, how do you find purpose beyond the fire service?
We need to know our purpose in life.
Hmm.
In April of 2015, our fire chief at the time wanted us to go through an exercise, us, I'm saying the chief officers, the command staff, to identify our purpose. Now, I knew what my purpose was, but the benefit of this day and a half course was I refined it. I refined it down to impact others through teaching and leading. And also, I tie my purpose into Luke chapter 12, verse 48 in the Bible. To whom much is given, much is required. To whom more is given, even more is required. But there's a lot of people, and you and I know an individual right now that's struggling with his purpose. What
Yeah.
am I going to do post retirement?
Hmm.
And it's not the end. Unfortunately, in the fire world, in law enforcement and military, there are a high number of suicides. And it's based off of what people have seen, depression, what happens after retirement. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't have any purpose. Listen, folks, you got to have a purpose in life,
Yeah.
and you need to determine what that is. You say, Rick, I don't know how to determine my purpose. Go to the show notes. My contact information is in there. Reach out to me and we can have a conversation about that. We can have a conversation about identifying what your core values are
Yeah.
and what you can do post retirement. There's opportunities to volunteer in a number of different areas. And, for myself, at our church, I'm involved in, leading and teaching the singles group. And then also I lead and teach a Tuesday night men's Bible study. And not to mention the fact also I got a business.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I
And a
have a
podcast.
purpose. What's that?
And a
And a
podcast.
podcast, yes, and a book. And
Hmm.
I have a family. I have my wife, and I have you, and I
Yeah.
have Rebecca, and I have her husband, Nick. Yeah, and and so what's that purpose? Listen, folks, you're coming up on retirement and you're within that 5, maybe even 10-year window of retirement. And if you're holding on to this notion that, well, I'm just going to retire and I'm going to go out to the lake and I'm going to fish. Well, nothing against fishing, but if that's your idea of retirement reality, I think you're nuts.
Yeah. You don't want to check out.
Yeah,
Like, don't check out on life.
no, don't
There,
check out.
like
Don't.
you said, there's still so much more to live, and it's just an opportunity to discover another part.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's hobbies. Don't immerse yourself in a hobby or a sport so much too that it's to the detriment of your
Yeah.
your family. So those are just a few things right there. Hey, stay mentally active. You and
Yeah.
I know someone very, very well who did not stay
Mm.
mentally active and they lived out their life
Yeah.
in a memory care
Yeah.
before they died. We gotta keep our brains active,
Yeah.
folks. You know, and active doesn't mean that you're just sitting around, watching Netflix or movies all day long. Active means you're involved with people, reading crossword puzzles, Sudoku, these different things that keep our brains
Jeopardy.
active. Jeopardy, yeah, we love Jeopardy. We love Wheel of Fortune,
Mhm.
watching those. It's that type of stuff that
Yeah.
keeps our brain active. And pour your life into somebody else's life.
Yeah.
Those of you who are in this boat, or even if you're, man, I'm 15, 20 years away from retirement. Well, pack this stuff away in the back of your Mark One brain housing group because the day will be coming, when you're going to retire. Help other people out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Those are just a few of the things.
So,
Yeah, I'm sorry, and
oh,
and then also that routine. I have a daily routine,
uh-huh.
and I think that daily routine might drive Deb crazy sometimes. But hey, out of the rack at zero
You're
four.
very routine.
Yeah, I am out of the rack at 04:30 in the morning. Hell, after I brush my fangs and shave my face, yeah, come work out, walk the dog, and then I've got that. I read my Bible, I pray. I've got that. I've got a routine that is set up there.
Yeah. So, did you receive any advice from retirees who successfully transitioned to retirement?
I did. The best advice that I had received came from Randy Morawski.
Mm,
And Randy Morawski had been the fire chief here in Loveland. He had served out a career up at Poudre Fire Authority in Fort Collins and left
yeah.
there, retired there as battalion chief, came down here in Loveland. And he was here approximately 5 years, maybe 6 years. And then when I retired, I had talked to him on the phone. He says, "Come on over to the house, Rick." He said, "I'll put on a pot of coffee and Judy will make some cinnamon rolls."
Yeah.
And she's a good baker.
Yeah.
I went over, and the advice that Morawski gave me was, Rick, he complimented me on my skills as an incident commander and responding to incidents. And he said, but look at it this way. He said, retirement is not like a structure fire where you show up and you're taking command and then it's out, in a shorter period of time, whether it's a room and contents fire or it's fully involved or it's a commercial structure fire. He said it's still a short-lived fire. He said compared to a wildland fire, a larger campaign fire that goes into an extended attack, a wildland fire that can last days, weeks. He said, that's what retirement is like. He
Hmm.
said, retirement is more like a campaign wildland fire that is lasting days, weeks, and in our case, he said months and years. He said, that's my best advice for you. He says, don't look at it as you're responding to a structure fire. And in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, four, depending on the size of the building, that you're done and you're back in the fire station. So I
Hmm.
really appreciated that. And
It's very
yeah,
valuable.
and I even drew up a graphic. I used to have it up here on the wall, but I ran out of room, so I put it into a binder
Hmm.
over here with that graphic to remind me.
Yeah. That's really good. And I think just don't do it alone.
Yeah.
Tap
Yes.
into your resources, tap into your family, tap into others
Hmm.
who have retired already. Don't do it alone. You're not
Right.
meant to live life alone.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Absolutely right, Emily. Thank you for that.
So to conclude, let's recap the key takeaways.
Yeah, so we talk about today is retiring from the fire service or law enforcement, military, EMS is like wrestling an alligator. We talked about change and transition. And as I mentioned during the podcast, perhaps later on this year, we'll dig deeper into that. And Emily asked me about the emotional and mental preparations
Mhm.
associated with it. And one thing I said, I'm welcome in the firehouses, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And I remember reading a quote from the great hockey player Wayne Gretzky when a reporter asked him about retiring, and he was discussing some of these things. And the reporter, quipped, said, "Well, you have access to the locker room." He says, "Sure, I have access to the locker room, but it's not the same because I'm
Hmm.
not playing."
Yeah.
And that's the same as a fire department retiree or a police department retiree. And I'm thinking of one individual particularly that I know from Loveland PD that really struggle from retirement. We have access. As firefighters, we have access to the station. Police officers, you have access to your station or the watch office, however it is that you term that. Military retirees, you have access to military bases, but we're not playing the game. We're not, we are in the past, and those are things that we need to take into consideration. And also for those of you who are there, I hear a lot of stuff about, oh, we're family, we're family. Some fire departments are really good about including their retirees. Others are not.
Yeah.
Don't say we're a family and then you don't include the retirees.
Hmm. Yep. So, can you direct our listeners to any additional resources that could help them?
Absolutely. I mentioned that book, Managing Transitions by William Bridges. Another one called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. That's a
Mhm.
small book.
It's a good
And
one.
then, yeah, and then another one,
Mhm.
Our Iceberg is Melting by John Cotter. And Emily, I've put together a 2 hour class and it's called Wrestling the Gator of Fire Service Retirement. For anybody who's listening out there, would like to learn more, again, go to the show notes. My contact information is in there. I presented this class to my former fire department back in October. And I recommend that anybody who wants this presentation that you target people that are in that 5 to 10 year range of retirement. It's not anything for an entire
Yeah.
department because it won't mean anything to somebody who's just in their probationary year or somebody who's 5 years on the
Yeah.
job.
It'll be
But
too
for people,
overwhelming.
yeah. And my intent with that is to stair step people through basically the emotional challenges that are related to retiring from the fire service had nothing to do with the financial aspect. I'm not a financial planner, so I don't even jack around with that stuff. Go to somebody else who knows. Yeah, hey folks, I'm a product of the New Jersey public school system, and I screw up numbers. So you don't want me talking to you
No,
about financial planning, but I could talk to you about planning for fire service retirement.
absolutely.
So, Emily,
Yeah.
as we wrap up, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think we just want to leave our listeners with this sentence is that retirement isn't the end, it's a new beginning.
Absolutely. I like that. Thank you
Yeah.
for bringing it up. It's a new beginning. Well, folks, that's the end of episode number 30, Wrestling the Gator of Fire Service Retirement. If you found this episode to be useful, please like and subscribe and share. Also, visit my website at www.fireofficerleadershipacademy.com. The link is in the show notes to learn more about the services I have to offer. My website also has a link to my weekly blog, which you can also find on LinkedIn on Wednesday, and
Yeah.
it gets posted on a weekly basis. So thank you for listening to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, Igniting Leadership Excellence. I'm Rick, and this is my co host, Emily.
We'll see you next time.
Hey, bye bye.